In this episode, I'll be walking you through the process of knife making via stock removal. For more information, check out my website, www.makingcustomknives.com. The material I'm using for this knife is an old file. I begin by heating it up until it is non-magnetic. Then I let it cool slowly to room temperature again. This process is called annealing, and it must be done before the file is soft enough to be worked with. Next, I check for straightness and correct any bends in a 3-point jig in my vise. This is simply wooden dowels taped into place. I next cut the file into 2 equal lengths. I'll just be using the small piece this time. The other half will be for a future project. I find it helpful to make a paper template so that I can refer back to it for size and shape comparison. This is optional though. I use a grinder to remove material quickly and cut out the rough shape, but I come back and file by hand to achieve the final profile. After marking the line for the shoulders, I use the jaws of the vise as a guide for straightness and file to the mark. I use a triangular file to make a small channel where the choil will go. Then I use a round file to cut it. You can see that at the end of this process, the drop point profile has been established. I've cut the shoulders here, that's where the guard will be accepted. And you will also notice this little notch. This is called the choil. That's where the sharp part of the knife begins, and that's where we will begin to cut the bevel. When cutting the bevels of the knife, I hold the file at about a 10-degree angle and draw it from the choil down to the tip. There isn't anything very complicated about this, it just takes a long time. You can see at this point that the primary bevel has been cut on the knife blank down to about 1/32 of an inch in width at the edge. The next step will be to sand the bevel to remove scratches from filing, and finally I will put an edge on the knife. I use a piece of scrap wood for backing, and I draw it in the same motion as with filing. Start with a 60 grit sandpaper to remove scratches from filing, and work your way up to the desired finish. The next step is heat treating. Heat and cool the blade, as you did to anneal it, at least 3 times. This relieves stress in the steel structure. I'll be using olive oil to quench the blade. I use a hot plate to get it lukewarm before the quench. The ideal temperature for the heat treat is just beyond the point where the steel becomes non-magnetic, but too far above or below that temperature and the ideal hardness will not be achieved. Before tempering the knife, I need to make sure that it hardened correctly. And to do that I use a file and lightly draw it across the surface of the knife. And it feels smooth. The teeth of the file do not bite into the steel because it's at an equal hardness to the file. And if you compare the sound and the feel to a piece of annealed steel, I can hear it and I can also feel it cutting.
I temper the hardened blade with a toaster oven using 3 more heating and cooling cycles at 400 degrees Fahrenheit.